Okay, good evening and welcome to Culture Quest, a virtual series featuring professionals from all disciplines, writing, visual arts, and performing arts. A 45-minute presentation is followed by a Q&A session. All talks spring from the theme, How I Got Here. Culture Quest welcomes award-winning, best-selling author Esmeralda Santiago, renowned Puerto Rican author celebrated for her captivating and evocative storytelling. Her literary works, such as When I Was a Puerto Rican and Almost a Woman, offer deeply personal and insightful narratives that explore themes of identity, immigration, and cultural adaptation. Her latest work, Las Madres, which I'm thrilled that I got finally, is a powerful novel of family, race, faith, sex, and disaster that moves between Puerto Rico and the Bronx, revealing the lives and loves of 5 women and the secret that binds them together. Santiago's eloquent prose and candid exploration of her own experiences have earned her a prominent place in contemporary American literature. I'm so pleased to welcome Esmeralda Santiago. Why don't you take it from here? Thank you.
I am so happy to be here. Thank you so much. I am just thrilled to be able to speak to our audience and that I'm coming through. I'm speaking from Memphis. I'm not in Westchester. That's why you can see a bed back there. I'm in a hotel room. And it was very, very interesting that the theme of our discussion for today is how I got here. And yes, I got here okay with the airlines. One of the very few no delays that I have had in a very long time. So I would like to, for those of you who have joined us today, who may not really know very much about me, I was born in Puerto Rico, and my work is 3 memoirs. Almost when I was Puerto Rican, Almost a Woman, The Turkish Lover. In addition to that, I have 3 novels: America's Dream, Conquistadora, and now Las Madres. America's Dream takes place in Westchester as well as Puerto Rico. Conquistadora is a 19th century story about a woman from Spain who decides to start a sugar hacienda in Puerto Rico. And Las Madres is a contemporary story about 5 women who know one another through friendship and blood ties, who decide to go to Puerto Rico for a birthday party for the eldest of the 5 women. And sadly, they arrive a few days before Hurricane Maria hits the island, and they are stranded there and have to figure out, how to survive, and then what to do with themselves once the hurricane has passed and they're in the middle of a disaster zone. So the books are all very, very different. Even the memoirs, even though they're my life story, they are about different aspects of my growing up and maturing. I never, ever imagined when I was a little kid growing up in rural Puerto Rico that I would ever be a writer. That was not in the cards for me. I really thought I would grow up to be just like the other mothers in the village where we lived. They were all had a lot of kids. They all stayed at home. They worked really, really hard because the place where we lived, there was no electricity or running water. We were all, my family from both sides, and in fact, I would imagine all the other people in the barrio where I grew up, we were all peasants with no land, essentially, so that we were very much dependent on the next job that would come and the next place that we could live in. Even though all these things happened to me, it wasn't until I was in my late 30s that I began to write about my experiences, and from the perspective of someone who had been in the United States for a very long time, had gone through all the process of learning a language that I didn't arrive here in with. I had to learn how to deal with climate. I lived in Boston, and that's a far far cry from rural Puerto Rico. I had to learn a lot about the culture in the United States, which was so very different from the culture of Puerto Rico at the time. And it was a huge, huge traumatic thing for me to be at 13 years old, to go from the place where I expected I would be the rest of my life until then I'm not there anymore. And I had to figure it out. But I hadn't thought of myself as a writer. My entire life, I was a reader, even when we lived in Barrio Macun in Toa Baja. We didn't have books, we didn't have a library nearby, but my dad brought newspapers from his many jobs. He worked very far away from us. Sometimes he would go and would not be home for 2 or 3 days because it was hard to get to and from his work sites. But he always came back with the newspaper, or one of his favorite things was the Reader's Digest, which some of his clients would give him. And so I learned to be a reader by basically reading everything that appeared in my hands, including, the cereal boxes and everything that I saw. But I never imagined that I myself would be a writer until I find myself in Hingham, Massachusetts, married with a little baby boy, and he was an infant. And I just looked into his beautiful black eyes, and for a moment, I had this sense that, oh goodness, he will not know anything about his mother, because here he's going to be growing up in suburban Boston, surrounded by people like him, born and raised in the Boston area, speaking English as his main language. And I felt this two things at the same time: this great loss that my history would disappear if he did not know about it, but at the same time, an opportunity to provide that information for him. So I began to write these essays from the perspective of when he was older. I would read them to him, or I would give them for him to have, because we did not live anywhere near my family. My family lived in the Bronx, and here we were in southeastern Massachusetts, and we only saw them maybe holidays. And so writing about my experiences told me something that I hadn't thought about really consistently, or even that I even dared to speak about it, even to myself, and was that in the United States, as much as I was a very, very ambitious kid, even when I didn't know that I was going to come to the United States, but that I felt invisible in this culture. And especially once I learned how to speak English, once I discovered a public library and I was able to borrow any number of books that I wanted to read, and then I would return them and I would get some more, and I was always looking for myself in that literature, and I didn't see myself in the literature at all. And that sense of invisibility really stayed with me. I didn't speak it even to myself, but I certainly felt it. And I think in that moment when I realized that my child needed to know more about his mother's life, I realized, okay, well, there's no one else who's going to tell him, because he certainly is not going to find it in the culture unless he really works very hard to find it. And that's really this is how I became a writer, was from this sense that I did not want to be invisible anymore in this culture, in this society. I not only did not want me to be invisible, but I did not want any other child in the same situation that I was in, who was curious about life and about literature and about this culture. I did not want them to feel like they were invisible, because if you don't exist in the arts of any society, then you really are invisible in that society and in that culture. And I felt that it was up to me to do that for my culture and my people, and never really looked further than that. My children should know about it, and maybe other little girls from Puerto Rico would learn something about it. It was a very, very big shock to me when I begin to write these essays about my experience, and are getting picked up by the Boston Globe and the Christian Science Monitor and the New York Times, and later on NPR, Morning Edition, and the evening shows. And I had felt invisible for so long that it was really surprising to me that anyone was interested in it, because I just had not seen myself. It just so happened that this happened to be the late 80s, early 90s, and there was a boom of Latina literature, particularly. There were some men from Spanish America ancestry, but the ones that really seemed to be coming through at that time and were becoming quite famous and well known were people like Sandra Cisneros and Gloria Anzaldúa and Julia Alvarez and Denise Chavez, and it was really wonderful that I came along at a time when publishers and readers were curious about this literature and about this experience that we had shared. From the writers that I just mentioned, Sandra Cisneros, Denise Chavez were both Mexican-American, Gloria Anzaldúa as well, were born in the United States and have the United States Mexican-American experience. Julia Alvarez from the Dominican Republic was raised in her country until she was a teenager, and as was I was 13 when I came to the United States. And so both of these experiences begin to appear in the consciousness of readers and publishers. And so it was a very fortunate time for me to be querying my own history and to figure out how to tell it. And much to my surprise, as I'm publishing these essays and radio essays, an editor from a small publisher in Boston reached out to me and said, I read one of your essays and I'm really curious and would like to see some more of your essays. And so I showed up at her house with, a 3-ring binder with copies of all my essays, that some of them that had been published and some that were still in progress for me. And it was her idea that I write a memoir about my experiences as a Puerto Rican in the United States. I remember looking at her like, what? It was such a shocking thing to imagine, because I had felt so invisible for so long. And just the idea that she saw something that even I had not really even imagined for myself. So I had to say, I have to think about it, which now sounds crazy. I think it would have been, yes, where do I sign, kind of thing. But at the time, I just didn't know, I did not know how to even start to write a book. I knew how to read a book. I just didn't know how to write a book. And so her advice to me was, Esmeralda, it's supposed to be about your life story. So you know the story. Just write the first thing that you remember, and then the memories will continue to emerge. And I was skeptical because I had spent many, many years not forgetting my history so much as hiding it or had it behind a curtain, because no one ever asked me very much about where I came from. And so I said, well, it's because people don't care. But she encouraged me that, in fact, some people do care. And not only that, but she said, but you care. I was like, whoa. That was the moment when I became a writer, that you write about the things that you care about. I suppose there are some writers who write about what they think their readers will care about. But I'm not that writer. I write about my preoccupations, my curiosities, the things that that keep me up at night thinking about things, and the questions and the whys about things, and the books that I want to read, and the notes that I take on things like napkins and little random pieces of paper all over my house. And so I began writing that book with the first thing that I remembered, which was as a 4-year-old arriving in a new place that my father had found for us in a rural part of Puerto Rico. And the house was made from flattened lard cans. So the walls were made of metal. And so, of course, child, 4 years old, the first thing I do is I touch it, and the sun had hit it, and I got a burn on my fingers. And my mother, of course, in typical fashion, said, well, you shouldn't have touched it. So it really set up a lot of what I remembered, and then it set up a lot of my relationship with my mother, which was that I was just too curious for her, and would always really go to an extreme that she wished I wouldn't go to. But I didn't realize that psychological instinct until I started writing this memoir about what it was like to grow up Puerto Rican in Puerto Rico, and then coming to the United States. So I become a writer because somebody else saw something that I didn't see, and that was that, in fact, my preoccupations with Puerto Rican life, Puerto Rican history, culture, that there are other people who might be interested in it, and that it's worth writing about. So I had to get over that insecurities about my invisibility in this culture, because now I'm throwing myself in front of an audience who doesn't know I'm coming, and saying, okay, read my book and learn about this experience, without no expectations that anything would happen other than that I'd say someday I wrote a book about my life, and now my children know what it was like for their mother to grow up in rural Puerto Rico in the 60s. Much to my surprise, When I Was Puerto Rican was very quickly received wonderful reviews, and was very quickly adopted into classrooms. Again, remember that time in the 90s when there was a lot of interest in the literature of people from Spanish America, on the part of reviewers and publishers and academics who had a lot of students who had the same experience that I had, but they didn't have information about what it was like to become who they were. So many young people at the time, just the way I was. I read Carson McCullers looking for experience about a young girl in the United States. Not a Puerto Rican one in this case, but I learned something about what it was like to be a young woman in the United States. And I think the teachers and librarians saw way before publishers saw that there was a great need for these kinds of books, and that, in fact, many people would seek them out because, for their own personal reasons, either they were like me, came here and are still trying to make sense of their experience here. And then there were the situation of many teachers and librarians and other people who saw this public arriving in their libraries, in their schools, or in their organizations, who were asking questions of the culture, of this culture, of, how do I fit into this culture given who I am? So the book is successful, much to my surprise. And then, of course, it inspired me to continue to write about my experience. When I was Puerto Rican, pretty much covers the first 13 or 14 years of my life, being in Puerto Rico, being the eldest of what eventually became a family of 11 children, my mother's struggles, my father's struggles, my own confusions, and of being a young girl who had expected something different, and all of a sudden I'm a different person in a different place, while at the same time my mother was saying, you can't change. We're here, but you have to be the same person. And my realization that, in fact, I had changed, and that I had to change in order to succeed in this culture in the way that she wanted me to succeed. Sadly, it meant that at a much earlier age than I would have probably realized, it meant that she and I just didn't see the world in the same way. And so when I was Puerto Rican, is the beginning of that process of my realizing that what I need in the United States is not here. It's not in the walls of our very crowded apartments, in which my mother, for much of the time, a single mother, raising 11 children, with my grandmother, who happened to be an alcoholic, and a whole passel of aunts and uncles and cousins who really did not leave the Puerto Rican neighborhoods very, very far from the places where they lived and worked. I really just had the courage, I guess, to get out of that environment, because the things that I wanted, I just didn't see it around me. And I knew that I wasn't going to get, we're not rich. I couldn't get it from them. And I'm not talking about things, objects, a capitalistic desire for things. It was more about my sense that I have to create this person from threads. I have to weave a life from threads that I myself had to collect. And at a very, very early age, realized that I had to do that, and I had to do it with very little information, except whatever I could capture from the books that I discovered in the library. I was very, very fortunate. My entire life is that, that adage that the Buddhist, the Zen adage, that your teacher will appear when you need them. And I was very, very fortunate that I've always had a person who has seen something in me that I did not see. Most of them were teachers, some of them were librarians, because I lived in the library pretty much. And so they helped me to navigate what was going on without my mother ever knowing what was going on. And I wasn't doing anything bad. I was a very good girl, but I was doing things that were suspect to her, because her whole attitude was, you are a Puerto Rican, you're a Puerto Rican, decent Puerto Rican girl. That's what she said, you are. And so her vision of an American girl, as she called them, were very different from what she expected from us. And the fact that I had to become very independent of my mother at an early age, because I needed something that she could not provide for me, made it impossible for us to become friends until I was really already an adult. It was the constant battle between us. That did not stop me from doing the things that I knew I needed to do, like get an education, not go into not have boyfriends, not get pregnant, all those kinds of things that were the terrors that I saw for myself if I continued to stay in the same community that I lived in, because my dreams and aspirations also were not necessarily supported in that community, because it meant that I left it. So for me to leave our apartments in Brooklyn were just terrible for my mother, while at the same time it was very exciting and wonderful for me, because that independence allowed me to get a sense of who am I and what do I want from life, outside of the lists of expectations of the eldest daughter of a single mother of 11 children living on welfare in one of the most challenged neighborhoods of New York City, in Brooklyn at the time. My second book, Almost a Woman, is about my adolescence and how I ended up, much to my shock and surprise. There's a theme here. I keep being surprised by success all the time. And that was that I went to Performing Arts High School because one of my teachers really had this idea that I should try to go there. And it was at Performing Arts that I was able to do something I had not been able to do for the last 2 years that I had been in the United States. And that was that I became a very, very good reader as a thank you, librarians, because I had access to books, and I taught myself English. I came to the United States before English as a second language classes. And so I basically had to read a book with an English language dictionary on one side and an English dictionary on this side, so that I could compare them and learn the language. And so that's how I learned how to read. So by the time I came to the United States into 8th grade. By the time I went into 9th grade, I was reading at a 10th grade level, but I could not speak because everything that I knew was written. It was the exact same alphabet that I knew in Spanish, but the pronunciation was beyond my comprehension. But at Performing Arts, they had voice and diction classes. And so I learned how to pronounce, and I knew these classes were not just for people like me. This is a school in New York City that at the time, and those of you who are New Yorkers or know or remember New York from that time, there were very distinct accents for different parts of New York City. So there was a very distinct Staten Island accent, very distinct Brooklyn accent, distinct Queens accent, Bronx accent, and Manhattan accent for people, everyone, even if you were not from a different language group. And so the object of Performing Arts was to make all the drama students to sound like they were from Nebraska or something like that. So I didn't feel like I was picked on to be in voice and diction classes. We were all struggling with how to pronounce English properly without our regional accents. And so that's where I learned how to speak English, and Almost a Woman covers that time and that period. And then again, that push me, pull you with my mom and my sense of independence, and her wanting to hold on to me as esa niña puertorriqueña decente. And I kept saying, Mommy, I am a decent Puerto Rican girl, but I'm just a different kind of Puerto Rican. So that book covers the ages of about 13, 14 until I'm 21. And I meet a man from Turkey who happened to be the same age as my mother. And because she never allowed me to date, because of course, her whole idea, she just had these visions We were not religious. I have to start at all. But she had this vision that all her daughters, 6 daughters, would end up marrying in St. Patrick's Cathedral with the long train and the whole thing. And I knew this was not even remotely possible for us because I had been to St. Patrick's Cathedral and I was like, it's not gonna happen. But because of her ideas of what a Puerto Rican girl should aspire to, that was not what I aspired to. I did not aspire to get married anywhere, actually, because I was the eldest of 11 children. And I said, not only am I not going to get married, I am never going to have children. I have just changed enough diapers for a lifetime. But I did met and fell in love with someone. And in The Turkish Lover, I write about this experience of leaving my mother and then going into this relationship. And while I'm in this relationship with a man who was very much like my mother, but I did not know that at the time, I only knew it later, that it allowed me to, in that book, I was able to really kind of understand a lot of what was going on with me. And also, again, this sense of my, I'm thinking in Spanish now, ahínco. It's like ganas. It's just this great desire to do something that that I wanted to do, that it was counter to all the other expectations from other people in my direction. So there was a societal expectation for a poor girl from Puerto Rico to be pregnant by the time she was, to drop out of high school, to get pregnant at a very early age, to work in factories, to not really have a great sense of ambition for themselves other than the life of her mothers and aunties and neighbors. And I did not want that. So then the North American society expected that this is the way it would be, because again, remember 60s and 70s, this is the city of Robert Moses and urban decay and all those other things, they were directed at us, people like us, people like me. If you saw West Side Story, we were supposed to be like that. And I said, no, I'm not going to join a gang. No, I'm not going to dangle from a fire escape waiting for an Italian guy to rescue me. No, I'm not going to, I'm not going to be this virginal white dress girl singing around the streets about how much I love somebody. I'm never even going to tell anyone I love them, because love gets women in trouble. It got my mother 11 kids. So all these messages were coming from both directions, and I was trying to parse them as much as I could and try to place them in the context of the life that I wanted to create. So The Turkish Lover covers my my early adolescence until I finally break from that relationship, and I really come into full flower of who I am in my late 20s. So it took me 3 memoirs to write about the first 28 years of my life. I never, ever imagined that my life was quite so eventful until I started writing about it. And I'm pretty sure some of the people in this audience are writers or are aspiring writers. And I do hope that if you have questions about the actual process of how that becomes, that you will put it on the chat, and we will be able to, I can give you much more specifics about that. But it was a very interesting process for me to, I felt like my entire life was building towards creating Esmeralda Santiago that I saw, and not the one that, oh, I'm getting emotional, that other people saw, and the people that were being reflected from their ideas of who I was. So I was very, because I was a a dancer. I was very aware of people's body language, very sensitive to body language, and I could tell what people, people would be surprised. For example, I would say my name, and they were surprised that I spoke English, or that I actually, could pronounce a lot of words that they didn't even know. So there were all these. I could understand, I could see it, that their expectations about me were predetermined before they even met me. And I didn't know where that came from. But I certainly wanted to make sure that I set them right, essentially, about, no, I'm not that person that you think I am. This is who I am. And so my job became, for so many years, was to just become the person that I wanted to be, people to see, and to be 100% Esmeralda all the time, and not having to pretend that I am anything other than that person. And it was a lot of work. It wasn't easy. Without psychotherapy, I couldn't afford it. I had to do it on my own by reading a lot about it, and reading a lot of philosophy and psychology, and self-help at the time, whatever I could find to help me manage this experience. So those are the three memoirs that kind of made me a writer, was looking at myself and what I was trying to do in the years that I was struggling with language, climate, environment, expectations from my culture and United States culture, against my own intelligence, ambitions, aspirations, and curiosities, and preoccupations about what it is to be somebody like me in this place. So it was, it felt like that was my job. I mean, it really felt that way until these memoirs were published. And that point when I actually, in these books, tell people what it was like, then I really feel, I feel now that I then really claimed the person that I had always wanted to be, by writing about these experiences from a very truthful, honest, and painful examination and exploration of who this girl, adolescent, young woman was. And I stopped writing about writing my memoirs at the point in which I become myself. And because now I don't have to explain. So that all that stuff emerges in the process of writing the memoirs, and I really understood it once the books were out, and I would go out and talk to people. And one of the first things that I discovered about my experience and how it's expressed in the book, and how my experience actually was not, I felt very alone, by the way, even though I'm the eldest of 11 children, I was surrounded by people all the time. I felt so alone in this struggle because my mother couldn't help me because she had her own expectations that I was challenging. There was no one in the culture who could help me because they didn't know my culture. They didn't know what I was pushing against. So I felt like I did it all on my own, and I was just so lonely all the time. And I remember when I Was Puerto Rican was published, and I was invited to speak at a bookstore in Washington, D.C., that very international city. And I talked about these struggles with When I Was Puerto Rican, and what I was trying to accomplish with my memoir. This young man stood up, sobbing. And he said, I would like you to know that your experience is my experience. I'm from Ghana. I came here as a graduate student. I'm a student at George Washington University, I think it was, and I had to go, and I went through this experience as a young man. I was already in my early 20s. He said, I can't imagine you going through this as a 13-year-old, and yet here you are. You're talking about my experience. And I heard this over and over again, that in my own loneliness and alienation, I was not aware that millions, millions of people were going through a very similar experience and feeling just as alone in it, again, because this invisibility in this culture that forced us to feel like we're not seen. And so I feel very proud that my work was part of healing some of these people's experiences from their own lives. I hear from many of my readers that my books have allowed them to understand their parents, which was my object, was for me and my children to understand their mother. But so many people said, reading about your experiences reminds me of my parents' lives, and they never talked about it. They couldn't articulate it. And so I feel so blessed that all these people in my life who found me and helped me at a time when I needed help. I didn't know how to ask for it. They just offered it. But it eventually made it possible for me to reach a point where I could articulate this experience, not only for myself, but for many, many other people who couldn't do it. For their own reasons. And again, for those of you who are considering writing memoir, I'll be happy to talk to you about what that's like. And by the way, you can put any your questions, and you can interrupt me at any point, by the way, with the questions, okay, Jennifer? Because I think these things, I don't want anyone to feel that they are alone in this experience if I'm right here to talk to you about it and to help you through it from the perspective of my experience. So that was the memoir side of me. And one of the things that I discovered or learned in the process of being out there talking about my memoirs and talking to my readers was that the publishers have a way of they have their own expectations. And as you probably are aware right now, that I am a person who really resists expectations, especially if I don't agree. And so one of the things that I was very aware is that the publishers, of course, would continue want me to write more memoirs and more memoiristic experiences from me. And I'm not going to give away all my secrets in memoirs. So I'm going to write novels now. And so that's when I began with America's Dream, which is a novel about a woman from Vieques, which is an island off the big island of Puerto Rico. Vieques is to the east of Puerto Rico, that 2/3 of it was a military base. And it's about a woman who was in this place and living in a situation of domestic violence and having the same kind of aspirations I had, which was, I want a life different from the one that I have right now, and I can't get it here. Theme, right? For people who read all my work, you can go, oh, yeah, check, that's it. And so she comes to the United States, and the book brings her to northern Westchester. And there's a scene that many people in our area points to her very first visit to Mount Kisco, which is now very different from the time that I wrote that book. But so she comes to live in our area, and as a Puerto Rican woman, trying to find another life. And then I followed that with a historical book. Again, I really wanted to do something really different and unexpected for my publishers, and that's when I went to 19th century Puerto Rico and found a story in my own questions, my own quest, my own culture quest, about a woman who wanted to relive the experiences of a conquistador ancestor, not really aware of what the situation was in Puerto Rico when she went there. And for me, that book is really, my other books are about a Puerto Rican trying to understand and figure out how to live in the United States. This book, Conquistadora, is about a woman from Spain who's 18 years old. It comes to Puerto Rico basically to become Puerto Rican, because it's a completely different environment and history and expectations again. And so that book required a lot of research, because it's the history is all true. All the events that I write about have occurred, not necessarily to those characters, but that if it's happened to has happened to somebody. And again, that book became a New York Times bestseller, and it's taught in the United States at a college level. Las Madres, my most recent book, it's been 12 years since Conquistadora was published. In the interim years, there were just a lot of things going on in my personal life that I had to deal with, and I just wasn't. I was not that I wasn't aware of time ticking, because I'm a person who always feels like I don't have enough time to do all the things I want to do. But so many things were happening at the same time. My sister died. My parents were getting elderly, required a lot of my attention. I'm the eldest. I took, had to take care of things with them and for them. And then they pass away, and the aftermath of their death, where of course there's a grieving period, and then Hurricane Maria comes along. So it was like boom, 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 boom. It was like dominoes of things happening that made it impossible for me to completely focus into the kind of work that I wanted to do that requires a lot of attention from me. And then Hurricane Maria comes, and it was, it felt like, it's just like, I can't handle yet one more traumatic, horrible thing happening around me. I feel like those things don't happen to me, but they happen around me, and I have to deal with them. And so Hurricane Maria and the aftermath required a lot of my time for the next 2 or 3 years, because it left the news cycle after about a month of everything that was happening in Puerto Rico. All the social media, all the news, just were not really thinking about Puerto Rico anymore. Lots of other terrible things were happening all over the world, and they had to report them. So I understand that. But in Puerto Rico, Hurricane Maria is still happening there, 6 years after the hurricane came. And I was very much aware of that, because I still have family and friends there, and I go there frequently, and I'm very involved with some organizations there that I support and encourage the work that they're doing. And I remembered at the very beginning of the pandemic, I was just on the cusp of writing a novel, and I was kind of, I have a process that I can talk about later if anyone is interested. And so I was writing about this book, and then I listened to a recording that I did the last couple of years of my parents' lives. I recorded them because I really wanted to capture stories that I had. Some of them I had heard from them, and some of them wondered about. I thought maybe there was a story in some little, passing phrase that I had heard over the course of the years. And so I began to record both of them. And one of the recordings that I was listening to was when I asked my dad about Hurricane San Felipe II that happened in 1928. And I said, I remember on this tape, I said, Papi, I just read about this devastating Category 5 hurricane in Puerto Rico in 1928, and you were a little kid, right? Do you have any memory about this place? My 90-year-old father, all of a sudden, before my eyes, became a terrified 9-year-old boy. Terrified. And he began haltingly to tell me about the preparations when the family, he was the child number 11 of 13 children, live births. And so he was about 9 years old. And so he had very, very strong memories of all the preparations that he and his parents and his older siblings had to do in order to survive this hurricane. Now, remember, 1928, no CNN, no internet, no radio for them because no electricity. People at the time knew that a hurricane was coming really when it was practically on top of them. And so they spent the hurricane in a cave. And so he had very, very strong memories and the terrifying hours in this place, seeing his house and the barns where they kept their animals, their entire neighborhood wiped out, and then the days after, how his family, his parents, and his older siblings recovered. And of course, he was 9. He had a lot of chores. Also, he had to work, and so I realized as I'm watching him, he just was still carrying this burden of this terrible experience as a 9-year-old. So Hurricane Maria became, for me, I realized there's going to be 2 or 3 generations of Puerto Ricanos on the archipelago, or the ones of us who are outside of Puerto Rico, who are going to carry that burden of that experience of that terrible hurricane for the rest of their lives, just like my dad did. He died at 93, and he was still traumatized by that experience. And so then I realized I abandoned the idea of the book that I was going to write. And I said, no, I have to write about Hurricane Maria. I didn't know what I was going to write, but I knew that the center of this book would be the hurricane and the aftermath. And so my process as a writer, and we'll go into it, although no one has asked, is to always know what happens in the middle of the book that I'm planning to write, and to have a sense of where the book is going to end, because it's very, very easy, for me anyway, to start a book. It's really, really hard to finish one. It's way much harder. And so I always figured if I kind of know the middle, which is where most writers abandon their books if they're not, if they don't outline, or if they are not thinking ahead to what happens in what I call the doldrums of a novel. Most writers really abandon their books at that stage, and I just said, I just don't want to do that. I want to know where I'm going, and so when I get to the doldrums, I know what to resolve and how to answer my own questions about what happens. And little by little, these characters begin to emerge from the questions that I'm asking myself about this experience. And the very first scene that I write is about 3 women on the roof of a house in the Bronx watching the 4th of July fireworks in the city and around it. And if in several parts of the Bronx, if you get high enough, you could really see fireworks all around you if you're on the roof. And so this is what these women were doing. And they were all talking and enjoying them and joking with one another and kind of jostling one another and touching one another affectionately. And so I wrote that scene, which, by the way, does not make it into Las Madres. For those of you who are going to be looking for it, not going to be there. It's one of the scenes that didn't appear, but it did give me a lot of information. Okay, I'm going to be writing about at least these three women, because obviously the way that they communicate with one another, they know each other, but how do they know each other? What is their relationship to one another? And so it's a process of questioning myself. And then little by little, these characters begin to emerge, and it ends up being actually 5 women instead of 3, and then their relationships to one another. Hurricane Maria is at the center of it. And the beginning of the book is pretty much leading up to it, in addition to a lot of other things. In 2008, I had a stroke, and I am frequently asked to write about my stroke. And I just can't write about my stroke because my stroke was so mild compared to the many other friends and people that I know, and published authors who have written about their own experiences with strokes. And mine was rather minor compared to them. And I felt I'm not going to write about my stroke because it really was not as devastating to me as it is to a lot of people that I know. But on the other hand, I really, there were a lot of things that emerged from that experience that I really did want to talk about. And so I create a character who has a brain injury and has a disability caused by a brain injury that then is also, and then she also has had a couple of strokes in her life. And my stroke was, I woke up one morning and I had been working actually on Conquistadora. Go down to my office as usual, open my page that I was working on, and it was as if overnight somebody had rewritten that whole chapter in Russian. I mean, it was like, what? I was like, wait a minute, I wrote this and I could not understand it. I kept reading it and reading it and read it. So then I went to another document. I said, maybe the computer did something overnight. So I went to another document that was an old one, and the same thing. I could not understand a word of what I was reading. And my husband at the time, my husband, comma, at the time was in Florida with his mother, who was in ICU. So I was by myself in our house in Katona. And I didn't know what was going on, and I didn't know who to talk to about it, except for my dear friend who lives in Rome, who I used to Skype with 2 or 3 times a week. And so I called her and I said, this weird thing just happened. Do you think I'm having a stroke? And so she and I are going through, do this, do that, do the alphabet backwards, count backwards from 100. All these things, no problem. I could do all those. And everything she said to me, I understood. We were joking about it. I took my tongue, stuck my tongue out, and it was where it should be. All the things that she was like, on WebMD or wherever you find out information about strokes, do this, do that. I'm going, none of it was happening to me. But she said, you are exhausted. That's what it is. You're just so tired that I was on deadline. So I said, okay, but this is, I feel strange. I just don't know. I just feel strange. So I called my doctor and, of course, then went over there and they fit me in. And I remember sitting there. There was again, remember the days when there used to be magazines in the doctor's offices? There was a New Yorker there. I picked it up and because I still could not understand what was going on. I drove myself to my doctor's office, by the way, no ambulance. I opened the New Yorker and I'm like, I could not understand a word. And so that's when my doctor, who has been my doctor for many, many years, just from the way I was talking to her, she said, okay, we need to check into this. And this is when we discovered that my stroke was very small in a particular part of my brain on the left side, which only affects the written comprehension. So that is the only thing that this stroke affected, was my entire livelihood. Basically, I could not understand anything. And there was very little that they could do, for that particular situation. But as they were going through all kinds of consultations and tests, and I was in the hospital, and my husband and my friends, it was like everybody rallied around me, and I'm still kind of puzzling, what the heck just happened to me? How do I fix this? And then I remembered, when I came to the United States, speaking Spanish, being a really good reader, and I would look at a notebook, a book, and I recognized the alphabet as we knew it in Puerto Rico, but I couldn't understand a word. I said, I'm in the same situation. I just have to relearn the alphabet so that I can actually learn how to read again. So I did the exact same thing that I did at the time when I came to the United States, which was to go to the library, and went to the children's department and started to borrow alphabet books and illustrated alphabet books. And so APPLE, Apple. So, and I just went from there. I just learned all the nouns all over again and began to recognize the what I was seeing. And little by little, I was able to recover my ability to comprehend the written word. And so that's how basically I cured myself. I never had any kinds of therapies, because they kept saying they couldn't figure out how to do it. But I said, I know, don't worry, I got this. I've already done this. And that's how it happened. So that's how I got here.
It's pretty amazing, and especially that you not only once but twice all over again. Really inspirational, Esmeralda. I am just amazed. Thank you so much for sharing with us. And I have to say, in the chat, we've got a lot of people who are saying, please talk about your writing process.
Okay, well, I can show you. You had asked me, Jennifer, if I had any PowerPoint. I have no idea where to even begin to do a PowerPoint, but I will show you. This is what my notebooks, this is what my calendars look like.
Wow.
Right? So I'm very disciplined about my work, because if you're going to do any kind of artistic work, you need to be disciplined about your creativity. And so, yes, it's not all just messy. You have to have some sense of discipline to be able to create anything. And so I'm very disciplined about my time. And my some of you, I see your names, my beloved friends, they know I'm a total hermit when I decide to write. I respect my process, which is very, very messy. And that is that I write, I don't believe that I should write a chapter and make that chapter perfect and then go on to the next chapter. I write very, very messy drafts all the way to the end. When I finish my first draft, sometimes it's 600 pages. It doesn't matter. 700 pages. Conquistadora was almost 1,000 pages on first draft. Because I'm going to put everything in there, and I'm not going to worry about whether this word is in Spanish or English. I put in whatever language comes, I put it in there. I just want the freedom to get the story down until I have the whole story there. And then the most fun part for me as a writer is actually the editing process of cutting things down and make it comprehensible, because I understand it all, but then I have to make it. So as a writer, at that stage, you're no longer the writer, you are your first reader, and you have to be able to read your very messy draft as a reader would who has no idea what's coming up. So that's what my process is like. It's a very messy, not perfect first draft. It takes as long as it takes. Sometimes I work 6, 7, 12 hours a day writing. Other times I only have 10 minutes. But I try not to beat myself up over, some days it doesn't come as easily as it does, even though, I have a sense of where the story is going. So that's one of the things I think for those of you who are aspiring authors or are in the process of it, is the hardest part, I think, for especially for an aspiring author, is to respect your process, to figure out what your process is. There are some writers who just like to write and not have an outline and just get up in the morning or at night or whenever they do it, and then they just want to make it up as they go. And then there are people who are very precise about doing outlines and that kind of thing. I'm an outliner, researcher kind of thing. I usually have to have a lot of research done. I do the research, I take notes, I have stacks of paper everywhere. But when I start writing, I very rarely go back to look at the research unless I need to look at a specific date or something like that. I just want to digest all that information. That is my process, and I trust it, and that works for me. But for some people, you need to do it differently. And the process of becoming a writer is to figuring out what is your process, and then to respect it, value it, and tell other people, this is the way I work. I prefer to write at a public library. I need to be surrounded by people, so I go to a coffee shop, or I need to sit outside, or whatever your process is. I'm one of these people, maybe because I grew up in chaos, I really need to be in a room by myself, and just not hear a lot of other stuff. I turn off my phones, I just try not to distract myself, because that's what I need to do. So that's one of the things that as an aspiring writer, is to really begin to pay attention to what works for you, and then respect it, and then let other people know, the reason I can't talk to you on Thursdays between 10 and 2 is because I have scheduled myself to write. And I write by hand, again, with a fountain pen. I'm an aficionada of fountain pens, and I do it in different colors because I'm from the tropics. Hello. So none of this like black ink and stuff. I would just, there's purple, there's brown. I have lots of pens with different colors. And I write a lot of my first few pages by hand, because it slows me down. A computer makes you, and then it drives me crazy. It corrects you, and I don't want to get into that rabbit hole of correcting myself until I have the entire story. So I do a lot of the work by hand, but I know a lot of writers who never do that. They hate their own handwriting. I hated it when I first started doing it, but this works for me. But if writing it on the computer and not be tempted to correct things, then do it that way. Again, the process of discipline about what works. And so I do that. The work by hand, and then I transfer it onto the page. After a while, I don't need to do it by handwriting. Then I do it on the computer, and then I can do it anywhere. I can be at a coffee shop surrounded by people calling their very special orders of lattes or whatever they need. But at the very beginning, I really do need that very focused time, and to have a sense of which way, what the voice is, because that's a whole other issue, talking about voice. And once I have the voice for this particular book, I pretty much can write, anywhere on anything. I've written entire essays on opened chopstick cover in Japanese restaurants because it doesn't matter where you do it. The question is you have to get the idea down. And I carry notebooks everywhere I go, and my trusty fountain pens, so that I can not lose that idea.
Yeah, you're a writer, and a writer's got to write.
Exactly.
I just wanted to share some of the comments that were in the chat with you, if you don't mind, Esmeralda. First of all, from Priscilla says, "Oh my goodness, as a diaspora kin, your writings have brought me life. When I was Puerto Rican was the first memoir that felt familiar." What a nice thing to say. You were saying earlier that if you aren't represented in literature, you're invisible, and your voice seems to really resonate with a huge population. That must really please you.
Well, thank you, Priscilla. And it really, that was, it really warms my heart to know that you're no longer feeling isolated and alone in this experience. It's if you haven't been through an experience like this, it's very, very hard to even explain it. A lot of people I talk to say, well, my dad was from with China. He never talked about it because it's just hard to articulate it. So thank you for your comment.
And Olga says, "Can you describe your typical writing routine or schedule when working on a book?" Which I think you just did a bit. "How do you approach the initial stages of a new project? Do you start with an outline or dive right into writing? How do you maintain consistency in your writing style, voice across different works or genres?"
I do a lot of research. I begin a book by having an idea of what I want to write about, right? So in the case of Las Madres, I knew that I wanted to write about Hurricane Maria. I didn't know what, because I was not there when Hurricane Maria came. I was in the United States in my comfortable warm house with electricity and running water. So originally I thought, well, maybe I'll write about what it was like to be a Puerto Rican in the United States, suffering with the people, but being unable to do anything for days. Really, you couldn't reach anyone. But I think at a certain point, I realized that I read a lot of books, a lot of testimonies, a lot of blogs, social media posts, all that stuff about that experience. And one of the things that came to me eventually was that I write in English, and that a lot of the things that I was reading were written in Spanish, and they were not getting outside of that language group. And because I write in English, I said, I have an opportunity to bring this experience to readers who are not reading these very moving testimonies from people who were there, who can only write their testimonies in their language, and some of them were recorded on YouTube and so on. And so I said, okay, so then I have to really write as if I were there. And so I had to research what it was like to be in a hurricane. And so I talked to a lot of friends who experienced it, a lot of relatives, again, read a lot of it. And it wasn't until I feel like I have enough information that I then begin to create characters, because I have to create a situation basically first. It's so maybe now I just realized now from my training at performing arts 40 or 50 years ago, when they do a improvisation, they start with a situation and then you go from there and you say yes all the way through, and so that's how I write. Is I have to come up with a situation for people to respond to, because I write about people. I don't write about events. I don't write about history. I write about people in their history and how people are affected by their history. And so I get as much information as I can, and then I start to think about, well, in this situation, what kind of person would be in this situation, and it's a process of questioning the research itself and questioning myself and my own preoccupations. So I knew that somebody would have a stroke because I had to write about the stroke in some way, because so many people had asked me to do it, but I just didn't want to do it in the way that I had it, that I experienced it. I said, I'm just going to have to create a character who has had that experience. I have enough experience to know what that was like. And the experience that you go through, from the fear and the rage and the the gods must be angry kind of thing. You go through this whole many stages when you've had an experience like that. And I really wanted to explore it from the perspective of somebody else who did not understand it quite in the way that I understand it now that I'm on the other side of it. So that's one of the ways that I do it. It's just prepare myself to write. And then, yes, I do eventually begin to put together little 3x5, or actually 2.5 by 2.5 size little cards with little, from my research, situations that I think are ripe for scenes. A character should be in this situation, right? In the case of Conquistadora, I came across really a footnote about the cholera epidemic in 1855. I had never read about that. I'm going like, why aren't people? It was a worldwide epidemic, actually, of cholera in that year, 1854, 1855, and this was worldwide. But in Puerto Rico, I had never seen it. But when I found that, I said, okay, that has to be in my book. But who gets cholera? so it's a question of constantly asking, what happens next and why, because I now have the facts. I just have to fit people in them, and I trust that process. And then I'll write an outline, and the outline I have pretty much stayed very true to the outline, but the outline really comes just before I start writing, after I've done all the research, and then write the outline. And again, I am not checking off, oh, I did that. I just put it aside. I know what to do, and then I go for it.
Fascinating. Do you have any ideas of what your next project is going to be?
I have a book on this not in a drawer. It's actually in my agent's office right now. That I hope will be the next book, which I'll be editing. And then I'm about halfway through another book that I've done a lot of research on it. I have the outline. Oh, the other thing I do, for those of you who are interested in process, I have timelines. I mentioned earlier, I feel like I don't have time to do all the things I want to do. I'm crazy about making sure I have exact timelines of what happens to everyone at any one moment. My wall looks like, I don't know, those of you who crime shows, with the the detectives, little lines and things pinned all over the place. That's my wall. So I'm very much focused on what happens when, because my perspective is that people live in history. They're creating history at the same time as they are living their history. And so I'm very conscious of the passage of time and where people settle into their lives in any particular time period. And so I do my outlines to kind of have a sense of when things might happen for my characters.
We'll all be looking for them. It's been such a wonderful to discuss with you, Esmeralda. We can't thank you enough for your time. It was so entertaining and educational, and as Sadar says, moving and inspiring. So thank you. And I also want to send out a special thank you to former Palm Ridge Library trustee and author Lori Sarnoff, and former Culture Quest presenter, artist Creighton Michael, as our artistic consultants and talent recruiters that have found such wonderful people to come on and make this such a quality series. So thank you to them. We couldn't do it without them, and without such special people as you, Esmeralda. Best of luck. I want to mention again that Las Madres is available at Palm Ridge Library and also on Libby as an ebook and an audiobook, as well as all of Esmeralda's other writings. So enjoy them, and best of luck to you, Esmeralda, with your book tour. And again, thank you so much for spending the time with us tonight. We really enjoyed it.
Thank you, all of you, for being part of this. And thank you, Jennifer, for inviting me, and Creighton for recommending me as one of the guests. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you all. Good night.